I think I was just talking about like having that strong self-concept is important, and like the way that you view yourself is more important than the way that someone
Mm.
else views you. And as long as you kind of continue to kind of adhere to that and realize like, okay, how do I see myself, and place more emphasis and value on that than how other people see you, I think generally you'll be okay. Um, but it's not easy to do. It's easy to forget how to do that.
Okay, so there is one thing I wanted to say about the topic of external versus internal validation, and I feel like this is probably a very common thing, but it's a lot easier to get internal validation as you get older, I think, because when you say you're in middle school, well, definitely the middle school environment is completely different than the adult environment. And if it's not, I feel really bad for like adults that have to live in that kind of environment. But you're definitely experiencing social pressures, and you are at the whim of those social pressures. Just now, I'm reflecting back to sometime in middle school when I remember these girls were trying to make me cry. I don't know
Hmm.
why, okay? But then I started crying and they were like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make you cry." Blah 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 blah. That just popped into my head, and that's just like a weird thing. Like I don't know the point. Like it was just a pointless thing. But I just say that because as a rational adult, if someone were to try to make me cry just for the sake of crying, it wouldn't have it wouldn't work, most likely. It just wouldn't work. And so I just say that because as you get older, you work hard towards something. You pick up some hobbies, you dedicate yourself to other things, you form these good relationships, and you develop yourself apart from your peers. And so I think that, I guess, when you initially asked me how I became less affected by the criticism of others, I think in part it's age, but I think that was an active journey. I think it's in part inactive and active. A large part of it is being actively in pursuit of such things that I mentioned. But
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah. First of all, that's really terrible thing to do to somebody, you know. Thankfully, I
I mean, when
avoided
I look
bullying for the
back, I
most
just
part.
laugh. I'm like, that was actually such a
Yeah.
stupid thing. I don't even get that.
It is
Like, it was
stupid, but like when
genuinely
you're
so stupid.
young, yeah, like I remember being young, and like I was very naive when I was young, like I was very like innocent and naive, and like I said, like I would be affected pretty easily by like anything that would happen to me. So I wouldn't know better when I was young. um if someone was like trying to do that to me, like I would probably just go home and cry. Actually, that's like there was only one time in high school where I genuinely felt kind of like bullied, and I just broke down crying like in the middle of class and had to leave like school that day, and then I went home and cried more for the rest of the day. Like I was so distraught by it. I was just like it was horrible. But and then the point on confidence, like I think we should talk about it more, like in the future. But I think a good question to ask is like where your confidence comes from, right? Like for you, a lot of it like comes from yourself, and like it's like a very like it's a process that kind of takes place in like your inner world. And I think for a lot of people that isn't the case. And I think you can kind of use that same model for a lot of different things, not just confidence, happiness, peace, like all of these different things, like emotional stability, where if it's too reliant on the outside world or your um environment or your external situation, like that's not a strong foundation to base something that like very important on. So I think one thing we should probably talk about at some point is how to kind of become a more like independent and self-reliant person who gets better at like validating themselves, like creating their own happiness, creating their own peace, basically, and just being a little bit more like self-sufficient in that aspect. Because if you rely too much on your outside world to do that for you, it's not necessarily guaranteed. Some people get really lucky, like you said, and things just work out for them. Um, for most people, at least in my personal experience, that isn't the case. Like you're always going to have things that, can kind of shift you or tilt you one way or another. And I think if you kind of build a stronger foundation for those really important things, like you will generally lead kind of like a happier, more fulfilling life, in my opinion. So we should definitely talk about that at some point, like how somebody actually goes about doing something like that, because um, I think it's an important thing. It's an important skill to kind of cultivate, and I don't think anyone's born with it. It's like a skill that I've had to kind of practice over time, and I
Hmm.
think now I'm in a place where I am a lot more independent in those ways, and I'm not dependent on other people to, for my happiness or my self-worth or whatever, but there are some people who maybe aren't there yet or don't know how to get there. So I think that's something we should talk about at some point for sure, maybe in a future episode or something. If people want to hear it, I think it'd be great to get some feedback from viewers as well, like what they want to hear about or what they don't want to hear about. So if that's something that I think maybe some people would be interested in us talking about, we can definitely do an episode on it in the future.